Hello and welcome to this video. And on this video you're going to be able to see a conversation between me and the jazz musician Jason Marsalis. Jason is a highly experienced drummer and vibraphone player that has worked at the peak of jazz, touring all over the world, making some incredible albums. But he is also a member of perhaps the greatest jazz dynasty of all time, the Marsalis family. A family, and specifically the musician Wynton Marsalis, who I have poked a little bit of criticism at on a number of videos recently, especially on a video that was titled "Why Do Modern Jazz Musicians All Sound the Same?", where I criticised a certain conservatism that I saw creeping into jazz in the 1980s, which I could see Wynton as being the sort of figurehead of that movement, right? Jason got in touch, and this conversation is not an adversarial conversation. It's a little bit, I think this is my most favourite interview that I've ever done. It's a long one, it's 2 hours long, so you need to get some sustenance if you're going to watch this. But it's a fascinating discussion for two people who love jazz. Me, as a sort of white middle-class British, middle-aged man who has loved jazz from afar, and then Jason, who has grown up in New Orleans, being surrounded by jazz on the inside. And I've got to be honest, it has really changed my opinion about the dynamics that were going around in the jazz scene in the early 80s. He explains exactly what's going on, and he raises some really interesting points. So interesting that I will now start to put together a video where I discuss some of the points he raised. This little journey I've been on of sort of criticising jazz has been a learning experience for me, and I now feel I have a much better idea of culturally what was going on in the 1980s and 1990s, that actually the way jazz has changed since then, and some of the things that are going on in the contemporary jazz scene that have nothing to do with Wynton Marsalis and that sort of conservatism that crept in the 1980s. There's other things at work. This is a really interesting thing. And if you're interested in jazz and the future of jazz and the history of jazz, this interview is essential viewing. So I'd like to present to you my interview with Jason Marsalis.
But thanks a lot for agreeing to do this.
No, it's an honor. It's an honor to do this.
Yeah, because, and I also rewatched the video again too, the thing that has gone viral, which I kind of figured it did because, it went my way and I think some other guys. So yeah. And I wanted to just discuss some things because I think there was some, because I agreed with the general premise. I think there was wanted to fill in some blanks in terms of like why these things had happened, because when it comes to I guess the generation after 2000, I'm their harshest critic.
Really?
But there's, yeah. Nobody's harsher than me. All their brothers, they don't have a prayer. It's not even close. As opinionated as they are, it's not even close.
Yeah. Oh, that's weird.
Oh yeah, but there's a reason for it though. There's a reason, and the reason is that I'm actually closest to that generation.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that I saw that I didn't like was happening and so forth, but I seem to be one of the few people that saw it going on. So, but anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about. Was there any questions that you had before I get started with that?
Well, the thing is, because I didn't expect that video to go as big as it did, and so it shows I pushed a button somewhere. People, there's something about it which people either agree or really disagree. So I know I pushed a button. I don't want to say then stand here going, I think I'm totally right. I put it out there to have the discussion, and I love jazz so much. I really do love jazz so much. It's one of the biggest things in my life. It really is. And I love anyone who plays jazz, and even if they're playing, Dixieland style jazz, it's great. If they play it great, it's great, So I felt I didn't come across like that in the video. But as it's gone out there, and because I did have a go. I had a go at, your brother Wynton is an incredible, I mean, one of the greatest trumpet players in history. He really is. But I wanted to point out sort of conservatism that I felt crept into jazz in the 1980s. And I was 12 in 1980. So when I was studying jazz and listening to jazz, especially from a British perspective, it was incredibly influential, but I came to question it. 40 years ago, I came to question it, so.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to talk about that from various angles. In fact, you know what? Let me see. You know what? Let's start there, actually, because honestly, I felt that, because, let me see, where do I even start? Because I'm trying to avoid like tangents. It's so easy to do that. But I mean, I'll give just for perspective, is that I'll admit that I was a little kid when maybe 5 years old when Wynton's first album as a leader came out.
Yeah. And
I remember when it came out. And honestly, my perspective was just, like, oh man, my older brothers got this record out and oh, this is great. They're playing it on every Sunday on WWOZ radio. This is, okay. A lot of stuff at the time I didn't really understand in terms of like how well it was selling, which was kind of unusual, and so forth. And then, as years went on, I started to meet the people that weren't into that music at all, and I found that interesting. Like you start hearing comments of, like these extremes of folks saying, oh, Wynton saved jazz, and then others, no, Wynton ruined the music, and blah, blah. And, there was one comment that I remembered particularly that I'll never forget, because it was like, that's interesting, where it was somebody, I think it was on, because I used to go on these, back in the early days of the internet, the AOL message boards, a long time ago. This is when it was first starting, and I'd go on there, and after a while I realized that there was people in there that liked music. So I'd go on there. I was in college, so I'd go in there and just talk trash, and But I remember there was this discussion about the 1970s, which was interesting. I think that the 1970s is one of those decades that need to be looked holistically and not like partially, but in terms of everything that was going on. And so there was a discussion about what was happening with it in music in the 80s, and then someone made this comment saying, it's like, man, the 70s guys, they had their eyes on the future, and everything was great until the young lions came and messed it up. And I was like, like, that's interesting. I'll have to, and I didn't even agree or disagree. It was just, wow, all right, I'll have to give that one some thought. That's an interesting comment, But then, it was somewhere in when I was in maybe a year or so after that, I was listening to the Mahavishnu Orchestra's record, Birds of Fire, which is an incredible record. And for some reason, in the middle of that record, I said, oh, now I see why they hated Wynton. Okay, all right. Oh, I got you.
Then I cannot believe this. That's my favourite band, the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I discovered your brother Wynton at the same time as I discovered the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And here in the UK, this is the thing that's really strange with Wynton Marsalis. And I know why it happened. It's because he was playing classical music as well as jazz.
Oh, yeah.
I find that insulting to jazz. It was like the mainstream went, oh, my God, this guy is playing jazz, but he can actually play classical music as well. And I felt like I'd been brought up on jazz by my dad. And I was like, what? Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Oscar Peterson?
No,
there's no classical musician can play like that. I'd been brought up with that, and I felt like he had this mass acceptance because of the classical thing as well. This meant he was a proper musician.
You know what? There's some truth with that. And the funny thing is that it works in reverse, where you'll have some saying, well, he doesn't have the feel of the old guys, which he actually didn't, but
he does now. He's still.
And he knew that.
Yeah.
But I mean, but then again, it depends on your intent. Like, if your intent is to make the music better, yeah, then absolutely. But I think that was that thing of, well, this is like in sort of the negative connotation of, yeah, well, this isn't like the feel of the real, but in a negative way. So it can go in reverse. But no, that is true. In fact, that's something that has. It reminds me of the story that my late father, who we all miss a lot. He told me something like that about the music of Ornette Coleman. Now, he was very lucky, and I don't know how many of these stories out there, but he was able to hear Ornette from like early, like before he got out there. Like he remembers because he was living in New Orleans, and I think he drove out to California, like because he was also in the Marine Corps at that time, but he would actually hear Ornette Coleman play, and I think Ornette's first record wasn't even out yet, and he had stories of hearing Ornette Coleman and Ed Blackwell practicing together, just the two of them, and how unbelievable that was. And he remembered when, there'd be jam sessions and Ornette's playing and dudes are in the back laughing and all this stuff, man, and people weren't sure of what to make of it. But I think what upset him the most was the person that actually validated Ornette was Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein said, "Oh man, Ornette Coleman's a genius," and then folks left him alone after that. And I can, so yeah, no, so I know what you're saying there.
You see what? I mean, as you know, if you watch the channel, I'm interested in jazz history. I'm interested in cultural things. I'd like to question it. You've told me two things. Is one of the Marsalis brothers questioned that because of the Mahavishnu orchestra? That's mind blowing to me. And the other one is that your dad was a fan of Ornette Coleman. That's mind blowing to me.
Oh yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think that is, I think one of the big misunderstandings, and I'm thinking that is probably just due to. I think there's a big misunderstanding about the Marsalis family as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think it was due to the position that Wynton took when he first got out there. And it was very much like, there were things he believed in, there were things he did, there were things he wanted to play, and there was things that he felt were being, I guess, taken for granted in the music, and so that was the first impression. But what happened was, I think, all these other folks, I think they took that impression, and then after a while, what he thinks is what the Marsalis family thinks. Marsalis family thinks this is it's like, well, actually, no, I mean. And then I'm thinking, well, if do you have a brother? Do you agree with everything they're saying? I mean, are y'all going to have the same viewpoints? So the thing is, and another thing about Wynton that's not understood is that there's opinions that he has about music. He'll still check it out, though. He'll still check it out. I mean, like the one of the craziest dynamics in the history of the music has to be with him and Miles Davis. I mean, them two. Whew, God, it was.
But this is legendary, mythic stuff now in jazz history. That thing between Miles, and your brother. This has gone. It's like a myth now. That's the thing. It's a myth.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like there's an interesting parallel between, I think, Wynton in this sense and pianist Keith Jarrett, because Keith Jarrett, and I always loved listening to Keith Jarrett with Miles, because I was thinking to myself, yes, Keith Jarrett hated this music. He thought fusion was a mistake. He thought it was trash. He hated the electric piano, but he's playing the hell out of it.
Yeah, oh God, it's some of the best electric piano ever recorded.
He's just killing it. Yeah, it's like, man, but anyway, there's but the thing about now the parallel with Wynton is that the thing is that as out as it was, Wynton would still go and see Miles. He didn't like the music, but he would still see Miles.
Yeah.
And he would even tell him, like, man, why are you playing this, man? What do you do? But he would still see him. He would still go. Because at the end of the day, he knew who Miles was, and Miles was a huge influence. He didn't like what Miles became, but he would still go and check him out. And there was other musicians he disagreed with. He would still go and check them out. And I think that there was... So anyway, as far as Marsalises go, there's this myth of, this certain thing that we either are into or not because of opinions that he had when he was real young and, arrogant, to be honest, saying a lot of these open. But in reality, in terms of the broad base of music, there's a lot of music that a lot of us have explored and checked out. And so, like with my father, one of the things that a lot of folks don't know about him is that there's a lot of things that he was knowledgeable about, a lot of music. Like a lot, so for instance, sorry for pausing here, I'm just thinking, like, for instance, we would have these discussions about popular music, but it would be like popular music from the 60s, popular music from the 70s, popular music from the, and I remember, I think he had said once in an interview where he referred to me as a dispassionate listener, because I would just check out whatever. Like, it didn't really matter. I'd come home, hey man, this is like some new rap that's actually kind of cool. Like, I'd check that. It didn't matter. I would just check it out. But the thing is, he had some of that in him though. Like, there was a broad range of things and things that people wouldn't think that we would check out, we actually would listen to. Like once, he was playing me this recording, and it was of Cecil Taylor, and it was solo piano of Cecil Taylor. I think the record is Native Tongues live at Montreux, 1972, and he was telling me, yeah, man, and it was interesting because I think that he had like an overall respect for Cecil Taylor, and there was probably some things that he liked and some things that he didn't like, but I remember him saying, yeah, man, Cecil's got a rhythm thing, man, that's really interesting, man. Check this out right here. And it was one of his solo pieces. I was like, yeah, I see what you're saying. And then one quote that he had about him, he said, man, whatever you think about Cecil Taylor, man, it got to a point where whenever he walked on that stage, there was a Bussendorfer piano waiting for him. So we would have all these discussions about various things in popular music, along with a lot of things in, how it shaped with America. So I think one of the reasons that your video had resonated with me is that you were dealing with things historically. You were looking at it as a whole, like historically, in terms of, how things had progressed and how things had evolved. And there's one thing that I wanted to point out in terms of like Wynton's I think more conservative thing in terms of which is debatable depending on perspective, but I've been doing some thinking. Honestly, I really think that the music was going his direction and he was just able to capitalize on it. And I'll tell you why I say that. Okay. The more that I got into the fusion thing, I'll tell you a quick story of how that even started. Because when I was a kid, I did have a negative view of fusion, but I thought it was the smooth jazz of the 80s. That's what I thought it was. Yeah. That's what I thought it was. So one day, this is like early high school, I remember my father was talking about the drummer Jeff Tane Watts, who played with Brantford and Wynton, obviously, and then he tells me, yeah, man, Tane gets all this stuff from fusion. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I didn't say that. But I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I'm hearing like Kenny G's music. Like, what the hell? So anyway, so when I was in high school, I was at this summer camp and I was at this CD store back when we had those. And so there's all these CDs and I look down and I see this CD that catches my eye because it was released on Columbia Records. Now Columbia was doing their jazz masterpieces. You'd see this blue border, but now I see this thing called Contemporary Masters, and I hadn't seen these. And the record was, I'm looking at this record, and it says, Return of Forever Romantic Warrior. What the hell is this? I was like, what? 1976? What? I don't know. So, but fortunately, they had a listening station. I'm like, I gotta hear this, man. What is this? So they're putting it on, and I open up the booklet, and I see the person. Now I was like, oh, Chick Corea, okay, Lenny White, okay. Oh, okay, I know these guys. All what I didn't know at the time was Al Di Meola. I didn't know him, but I know these guys. And when that music started, I'm sitting here like,
and then Lenny White kicks in that drumming. God.
And I'm sitting like, what the hell is this? What is going on? I don't understand what's. And then the music stops, and then Chick Corea goes to another keyboard, and I'm like, huh? And then there's this breakdown where Lenny White just starts going off. And I said, like that just like paradiddle with bass drum and snare. But I remember saying, wait a minute, this must have been the music Dad was talking about when he said that Tane was influenced by fusion. And then the music continues. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. What is? And at some point I had another question like, wait, how do we go from that to where we are in the 80s? This is not adding up. Like, this is not, something's not making any sense here. So I remember not long after hearing it, I think I had called Brantford, because, with fusion stuff, I talked to him. And I was like, hey man, do you know about this record, Romantic Warrior, Return to Forever? He's like, yeah! He's got all excited. Yeah, they're killing. I was like, man, what are these cats playing? I don't know what they're doing. Oh man, you'll hear it, man. You'll check it out. I was like, damn it. No help at all. But after that, what I did do was I did decide, like, all right, I'm going to do a deep dive into Chick Corea. And one of the things that was great about it was I was fortunate enough to actually meet Chick Corea and get to know him a little bit. His death stung a little bit more than others because I got to know him a little bit. But I was able to tell Chick Corea this. I said, it was interesting. I was able to do like cross-generation listening with Chick Corea. So I'd go to the CD store and get like, let's get No Mystery, which was the great first Return to Forever album to listen to because I could understand the music and what they were doing. And I was like, oh, okay. But then the next visit, I might get Light as a Feather, but then get Inner Space, which was originally Toast for Jones Bones, his first record. Oh, okay. And then another visit, I'll get Wherever I Known You Before, and then Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. Like, oh, okay. Oh, man. So it's like I'm getting stuff from the 60s and 70s, and then at the same time, in the 90s, he just put out a solo record. So it's like, it's interesting to just check out something from a cross-generational standpoint. And then so I saved Romantic Warrior for the last. I'm like, let me just save that. And then when I got into it, I was all in. I was like, all right, now I know what guys are doing. This is incredible. This is great stuff. Okay. And now I got, so after that, I started to, it was after that, I started to do, it was one time, in fact, I'll dovetail this into another story. I had ordered some CDs, and it was like a lot of 70s fusion stuff. It was Weather Report and Mahavishnu Orchestra and Herbie too, 70s Herbie. Ordered all these CDs, and ironically enough, like, I ordered these things, I was in college at the time, and I ordered these CDs, brought them to the dorm room, and I'm scheduled to do this interview for Modern Drummer magazine. And the interview, ironically enough, and I didn't really put this together, the irony is the interviewer was Bill Milkowski, the author of the Jaco Pastorius book. Now, I'm not really thinking anything of this, because I've known Bill. He used to live in New Orleans. I'd see him around and everything. So these CDs come in. The interview is like days away, and I'm not thinking anything about it at all. It's days away. They're lined up, and so Bill Mikowski shows up for the interview. He's like, hey, how you doing? I was like, oh, I'm doing great. He comes in, and he sees the CDs, and I see his face, and he says, oh, you have Weather Report. And it shocks him.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, oh yeah, I forgot. Guys have that expectation that we only know music from 50s and nothing else. But what I said was, like, well, I'm just checking this stuff out. And I told him the story about when I had first heard Romantic Warrior and how it was music that I didn't understand. So I'm like, well, man, what did cats actually play? And what was going on? And said that I thought it was a lot of the 80s stuff. Yeah, so anyway, I guess saying all that to say that when I started to get into the music, and checking these things out, at some point I discovered that, and this leads to my point about the music going in the direction that Wynton was. And what that means is, I think that the energy of that I've often said that fusion ran its course, but that's not really correct. I think there was an energy that the fusion thing had that kind of ran out. You know, there's an energy that the music did have, like early to like mid 70s, that it had, even late to a degree. But I think that it became a more mainstream music, and it became like a little more pop, you know. And I think when you get to the late 70s, especially like Weather Report, you know, like Heavy Weather is essentially like a pop record in terms of not content but like structure. Like tunes are short. There's almost very little soloing, and the tune with the most solos is last. Yeah. It's last. I mean, that's like pop music. And then, you know, when Weather Report did Mr. Gone, a Downbeat gave it 1 star, which I don't agree with the 1 star, but I think I understood the the reviewer's sentiment. And I think that what he was saying was, hold on, this is becoming really commercial, which is kind of like late 30s swing music.
You've made I have never thought this before, is that the point you're making is, because I've been so critical of what happened to fusion when it turned into Fusac in the late 70s and all that schlock that came out. And there's some great stuff, but it's underground. Ornette with Prime Time, you know, Steve Coleman, M-Bass, all that's incredible stuff. You know, that's there. What you're saying is that mainstream, because those records have sold a lot. There was a door that Wynton could walk into of going, right, you know, so that they've done their thing now. And I know the thing is, I remember your brother coming out. He had a documentary on BBC TV here, mainstream documentary. No, and so I love jazz. I watched that, and I can remember thinking, my God, this guy's amazing. And I can remember coming out, watching that, and thinking, jazz is the best. It's the best form. I wasn't like going, oh, this is all conservative. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And they were playing heavy. But also, you see, I think my issue is, I'm British, I'm white, I came up through rock music, I loved heavy metal, I loved the Police.
Yeah.
When Sting left and formed that band with your other brother, so in the 80s, you've got there was 2 mainstream things. There was Wynton and this sort of return to sort of hard bop approach, which then he seemed to be going backwards. You know, there was that sort of conservatism. Incredible albums. You know, I love this. I love the debut album with Tony Williams on and Herbie. God, insane. But then you had Brantford, who would. There was like this. It was the beginning of jazz artists moving into the mainstream and playing for major artists. The idea: you want a good player, get a jazz artist. You want a drummer, get Omar Hakim, which is now the norm, isn't it? It's the norm. You know, it's if you've got a huge superstar. And you look at those players, they're going to be jazz players or jazz influence players. And so those 2 things are the 2 big influences through the 80s. Now, the issue I have, I'm going to really go deep now into what my real issue is with this. Me, British, right? I was brought up by my dad listening to jazz, right? And from my British point of view, I never saw Duke Ellington or Count Basie or Oscar Peterson or Lester Young were black artists. They were artists. Right. I came up, but my dad would be like, listen to this, you got to check this out. And he'd put Count Basie on album. This was hallowed stuff. To me, I can remember watching an interview with Duke Ellington when I was a kid, just after he died, and I was going, that's actual Duke Ellington. That's one of the greatest, not just musicians, one of the greatest creative artists. That's like looking at Beethoven. That's like looking at Beethoven. Yeah. And jazz has this reach. It reaches out straight away. You know, it reaches out to the Hot Club of France, Stefan Grappelli, Django Reinhardt. It reaches out, and to me, it was this big thing that put its arms around me. Here in the UK, this little, you know, middle class white kid into rock music. It reached me deeply. And I think as I got older, the problem I had with your brother, and I'm going to say it because this will make the interview more interesting. This is the real fundamental thing. This idea of making it black music, that this is a black art form. And I understand I'm not denying it's an expression of the black American experience. Of course it is. But it's bigger than that. And the gift of Afro-Americans artistically is diminished. by this encompassing it within black music, black art. Does that make sense? You know, and I'm saying this to a Marsalis, so I'm you know, so it's and Stanley Crouch as well. Some of Stanley Crouch's ideas are incredible. This sort of embodiment of democracy within inside, all incredible. But it diminishes jazz for me. It diminishes it.
Yeah, you know, that's interesting. Okay, let me see here. Sorry about that. May have to restart in a minute, but
is it going to run out of time? Is it?
Yeah, but no, that's a great point. I think what was happening is that one, you know, and I'm thinking through it because I think that I can understand it diminishing, but then at the same time, there's realities that are there because there was a lot of racism that Wynton and Brantford growing up had to deal with. And to the point, honestly, and not saying that it wasn't there, I didn't have to deal with it as much as they did. I mean, there's all sorts of stories like...
Give me an example of this, because I want a counter argument for what I'm saying, because I think that the power of jazz and its message, it fights against racism, and I sometimes think by diminishing its power of being all-encompassing. Well, I mean, I really want to try and get into this with you. This is what I really wanted to talk to you about.
Absolutely.
Is the looking at jazz history through a sort of then 1980s lens of the progression. Well, I tell you, I'm trying to give an example of it. I'm a white guy, so I'm treading so carefully, even saying this to you as a black guy, because I've got to tread carefully. I've got to, what you know, we're negotiating this, and that negotiation, that starts, civil rights wise, you're in a different place in the 1980s than you were in the 1960s, and we're in a different place now, and it's almost like divisive now. And I'm almost like, look back at those, look at Louis Armstrong, look at Charlie Parker, look at Duke. That's where it's at. That's where it's at. That questions the whole narrative all the way through. It questions it. Charlie Parker was a genius. He was highly intelligent. He understood quantum physics. He understood classical music. That guy was one of the great artists of the 20th century. Don't box him up as a jazz musician or Afro-American musician, black musician. They don't do it to white musicians. That's my point. They don't do it, do they?
Yeah, no, they don't.
They don't.
Ironic, because that was something that even recently Nicholas Payton had pointed that out, interestingly enough, when the late Ahmad Jamal just passed away. So, you know, this jazz pianist, you know, they kind of have to box him into that. But they don't do that with like Leonard Bernstein or, I mean, even if it's like because I think he even listed even like a black opera or operatic singer like a Leontine Price, like they won't do that. But they'll box him in. But yeah, but to the point, what I was saying was that there was a lot of like racism that was like being like born, like the Civil Rights Act passed and Brantford went, they're like 4 or 5 years old, you know, and so there was a lot of like racist things that they had to deal with. So for example, there's a story that I'd heard, I think Brantford was telling this story about this trumpet competition, classical music, interestingly enough, and that Wynton wouldn't win. Then finally, Wynton wins, but they don't award it to Wynton. They award it to this same white kid, you know. And so I think
And when was this? This is like late 60s.
This is like I'm going to say mid 1970s.
Yeah,
mid 1970s. You know, and it was funny because apparently, because I think Wynton was 16. Brantford's story was. I think because he was the one telling it to me. In fact, I got to ask Wynton about it. But I think Wynton turned to Brantford and said, "I got him." Brantford said, "What are you talking about, man? You lost." "No, man, no. He knows. He spent too much time not to know." And you look over and the kid's head is down, and the parents are like, "No," because they used to patronize Wynton, you know, but they wasn't doing none of that. But the kid won the award anyway. So you got that. My father even made a statement. He was speaking at an event, this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, for like the Boy Scouts. And then before he gets into his thing, he just casually says, "Yes, Wynton had a chance to be an Eagle Scout before racism reared its ugly head." And I'm like, damn, really? You know? So, yeah, like, point being, yeah, which not, I wasn't saying that. I mean, he should have said that, but I was saying it like, damn, there's some more. So there are these things of racism, things either being refused or things being, so there is this attitude of, and also, I think that you had ways where the music was disrespected. And this is the irony. This is the irony about the whole thing with jazz education and all.
Here we go. This is it. This is it. Yes, 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 yeah.
Of that. This is the irony. See, when my father was coming up, yeah, he was telling me about, man, okay, let's go back to the 60s. He was saying that during that time, there were schools where if a musician was caught practicing jazz, he would get expelled. They would put you out like, no, you got to get out of here. I mean, you'd have security guards like, like watching. It was like, no, you can't. And I think that that's where the saying legit music.
Yeah.
And which means the other style is illegitimate. That's a part of that. And so I think that my father, after a while, started to have this vision of the music being taught in schools. But he's thinking about it in terms of this music of Duke Ellington should be revered the way Beethoven's music is. The music of Charlie Parker should be respected the way that Mozart, whatever. Like it should be. So he's thinking it should be taught the way that this music is taught. He's thinking of it from a respect angle. And ironically enough, like Wynton's angle, and I of course know that there's people that hate this because I think they probably got flashbacks to the 60s establishment, but Wynton decided, you know what, I actually want to wear suits to respect the music. So I think there was this thing of seeing the music being disrespected, and also coming along in the 70s when at that time funk was like the rage. Like him and Brantford, they were in a funk band called the Creators. And the thing that I like that I think I've told.
If only there was some video of that out there.
Video, audio. I've been asking her. Is there any of this? And I don't think
Wynton Marsalis hitting those hits. Oh, that would be amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I don't know if there's audio. Now I will say there is audio. I will say this, and not a lot of folks know this, but there is what I refer to as the Marsalis reel-to-reel collection. Oh, that's a thing. Oh, yeah, that's very real. And I think a lot of that stuff Delphia was recording. So, like, Wynton Marsalis senior recital at Noka while he's in high school.
You know what I'm getting from this? Because we're going to have to jump out in 2 minutes. You're going to have to send me another link on Instagram. So we got to keep talking. This is great because we're critiquing certain things. It's only details, and you're softening my viewpoint without a doubt. But also you are debunking the myth of the jazz royal family, which is the Marsalis family. You're debunking that myth that what you've got really is a whole ton of musicians. They like different music, different points of view, and they've got different approaches. And there's that. I think this is brilliant because this is the thing about jazz I love. This is the thing about it, that you could talk to me, from another country, all that type of thing, and start telling me about Romantic Warrior. It's identical to me. It's the same experience I had. Exactly the same thing. And I can remember staring at the speakers going, what is that? And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? That's the beauty, of being able to reach out,
But here's the thing that's interesting, though. Remember when I was talking about sort of a door that Wynton walked into with the late 70s? Yeah. I wasn't even finished.
Yeah, keep going.
There was like more.
Yeah.
Because I started looking at the music and saying, wait, hold on. Folks, because I think in the argument that the argument I would have is that the music went back to swing. And here's how I say that is I remember when I first heard Weather Report's album, Night Passage, and I actually hated it. I was like, no, I can't, no. Now it's not that bad of an album, but I think what happened was I could hear that I think the excitement that the fusion thing had wasn't there anymore. It was a thing. It's just intangible in the music, and I don't really know how to describe it. It's just an intangible thing. There was this excitement where guys are just going for it, and they really believe in what they're playing, and they're having a ball, and just something just wasn't there. And so, I mean, and Night Passage isn't even that bad, even though, for the record, and I just wanted to throw this out there. There was a recent reissue of, newly released tapes, the Weather Report live, and what was it? The Weather Report. It was a bunch of the Weather Report lives that have been coming out recently. The one that Peter Erskine put out. It was like where they were on tour.
Yeah.
Where I think there was tapes that Peter Erskine had, and CBS released it. But anyway, I'm only bringing it up because the version of Wayne Shorter's tune, Port of Entry, that's worth hearing. The version on Night Passage does not do that tune justice at all. When I heard that version on, and I can see it, I'm forgetting the name of the damn thing, live and hell. Anyway, when I heard that version, I just said, wait, what? Oh, that's what that tune is? So, but anyhow, but then when I looked at it, okay, Night Passage was like 80, and a lot of that album was swing-based music. The first tune was like swing with a backbeat. Second tune was a ballad. Port of Entry was more rock. Fourth tune ballad. Rockin' and Rhythm, Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
And then Fast City, Fast Swing. Then Three Views of a Secret, Jocko tune, swinging 3. Then Madagascar, swing again. So it was like swing-based music. And then I keep looking, and I'm like, let's look at Keith Jarrett. What are you doing in 1980? Oh, Standards, Volumes 1 and 2. The first trio albums with Gary Peacock and Jack Teajonet, where they're playing standards. Yeah, let's look at Chick Corea. Oh, the Griffith Park Collection. How about that? Where it's like Chick, Stanley, Lenny White, and it's like kind of a take on VSOP with Freddie Hubbard and Joe Henderson, and they're swinging out. And then they did like 3 albums, and the third album was with Shaka Khan. It was under a slightly different name, but it was Echoes of an Era.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? This is good. And man, Lenny White made a statement, and I can't get it. You would have swore Wynton said it. You would have. I was like, wait, and this is like 81. When's his first album anyway?
Early 80s, reading an interview with Lenny White. See, it might be the same one. And he said, the guys today are playing licks. He goes, we learnt phrasing based upon bebop. That's our generation. And he made that's a very Wynton's type statement, isn't it? That it's just licks now. It's,
Oh yeah.
But what this is the music industry, isn't it? This is, once they saw that these records are making money, right? Then the disco thing happened, because one of the my favorite genre is Narada Michael Walden.
Oh yeah. Yes.
That's godlike drumming on there, and I've become very friendly with Narada because of the channel. Is incredible, so we chat quite a bit. And he said to me, he was making fusion albums. Record company comes along and says, "Look, have a hit record or we drop you."
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of this album, and this album is interesting to me because it literally sounds like creative forces and commercial forces are at war on the record. And it was Tony Williams' lifetime, $1 Million Legs.
Yeah. Incredible stuff and terrible stuff all the same.
Yeah, I'm like, this record is weird. Hold on. And it literally sounds like creative and commercial forces are just fighting each other. That's what the record sounds like.
Tony Williams and Cecil Taylor exploring the outer limits, and then mad disco tracks, and then stuff in the middle as well. Actually, guitar solo that's cool.
Yeah. Actually, that was you mentioned Cecil Taylor. That was another record called The Joy of Flying.
Oh, that's Joy of Flying. Yes, sorry, got the wrong. Yeah, that.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
but you valid point though.
But $1 Million Legs. Yeah, I know which one you mean, especially after Believe It beforehand.
Oh, Believe It is killing. Oh yeah, Believe It. Yes, that's on. But it's
I'll tell you the problem. These are the sort of issues I have. Is where does someone like Alan Holdsworth sit within the jazz history? Because if you take the last 40, 50 years, probably the single most important voice in jazz, which all these guys that are playing now conservative jazz, how much Holdsworth's in? They're all on every instrument. He is like a voice that has changed jazz, and yet the jazz world don't seem to quite let him in.
Yeah, that's it. Actually, well, you know what I think a lot of those guitarists now are, I think there's some truth to that, but you know where a lot of the guitarists are, who they're really coming out of? I mean, some of that Allen influence, but honestly, they're really coming out of Kurt Rosenwinkel.
Oh yeah,
That's who they're really coming out
because
of.
what Kurt's done is he's taken like Metheny, Schofield, Holdsworth. It's those big influences, stuck them all together. That's what I hear when I listen to him.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt's definitely coming out of like that. I just consider it like an era of guitar.
Yeah.
For me, like that era of guitar, because you had Holdsworth and McLaughlin and who else? Tommy Bolin. You had like various, they were sort of an era of guitar. To me, Kurt kind of comes out of that. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, some of it might have been the fact that, I don't know. I mean, it could have been that Holdsworth was kind of in the fusion thing and was really stuck in there, but I don't really know, in terms of why they won't let him in. I'm not sure. I mean,
that guy was like almost like starving to death. He could have no support anywhere because he couldn't go on that normal jazz into the normal jazz thing where it's the same in here in the UK. There's grants, there's money, there's funding for jazz, but if Holdsworth, you can't access that. Another guy one of my favorite guitar players of all time, and one guy that did incredible stuff in the 80s, is Scott Henderson.
Yeah.
Same thing with Scott Henderson. These are. I mean, I've sent a few messages to Scott. I'm going to interview him on the channel because he's got a certain opinion about this. Because he's influenced by rock and metal and funk and soul. Because those influences. Now that guy can play jazz. That guy can play jazz.
Yeah, he can.
He really can play jazz. But there seems to be a division between that and then this sort of established academic, worthy, conservative, with this, we got to respect this type of jazz which gets the funding and the grants, and there's that whole thing, and then this idea that then you're bringing in affluent kids who can then get the grant to go to music college and make music for their parents and family to watch, because no one's going to be interested in this in the real world. It's this isn't jazz.
Those affluent kids.
You know what I'm saying? These kids, and they're great.
They're let me see how to. There's the place that I want to go with that. That's why I kind of.
I'm loving this conversation. The best.
Because I'll admit, there's a conversation that I would like to have with Wynton about that, and I'll just leave it there.
Well, I'll be fair. I'll be fair to Wynton, and it's like this is a guy grown with the civil rights movement. He's making a certain artistic stance, and it's aggressive. Good on him. He's making a stance about jazz. He's saying, look at this art form. This is the great American art form. It's a world. My problem is it's the limitation. But anyway, it's a great American art form created by Afro-Americans, a product of how that's been treated and the consequences. I get all this. I get it all. And he's making a statement about jazz, like respect this form, right? Yeah. But what the trouble is, it's everything atrophies, doesn't it? Everything does, like fusion did, and that has as well. It's now we've got a situation where to me, when you say jazz to a normal person, it's privilege. It's elitism, privilege, well-off people that can afford to have a career in jazz because they don't have to make any money. I'm a rock guy. I never went to college. I never had a lesson. I learned everything listening to records. Absolutely everything. I got it all wrong. I don't know whether I can play jazz right or not. Do you know what I'm saying?
You know what's interesting about that? You know where I think that may have started, or this is, in terms of like jazz being for like rich people, because there was a scene. This was a trip seeing this. There was a scene in the movie Jailhouse Rock, starring Elvis Presley,
Yeah.
And have you seen
Yeah,
what I'm
I've
talking
seen it.
about?
Yeah.
That is an interesting scene because one, you have the Elvis is in some rich people's house or some party, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let's put on the newest jazz." Everybody's white. They put on this record, and it's definitely like I think like
Like
Chet Baker,
white
Jerry
West Coast
Mulligan.
jazz. It's like that Jerry Mulligan school,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it
It's
was
that.
like West
Yeah.
Coast. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely that. And they're talking in these, and I'm watching this like, yeah, this is not music at all. And they're talking in these more formal, oh yeah, this new record, I can't even remember. It was like the dialogue was kind of driving me. I mean, it's to the point where it's making Elvis look great. Where I'd be like, I mean, if I was there, I'd be like, Elvis, come here, that's trash. No, come here, bro. this is no, this is not it. But I think that might have been the earliest that I can think of where that I think was this image, because my father had an interesting story, and this is around the same time, like late 50s, where there was some club shenanigans that happened. I can't remember the details. I think that there was a club owner who had this club, and I think somebody rented out and they had booked this gig, the band that and I'll get to my father's music in a minute. So they booked this gig. And so somebody rents out the club and says, yeah, can I book this party? And the guy says, yeah, I have a band. Great. But the problem is the band is not there to play party music. But they don't know that there's a party being booked. So they get there and they're playing their stuff. And the people, it's like black people, they're partying. Like, man, what are they doing? But what was interesting was somebody told them, man, y'all playing white people's music. And that was in the late 50s. And so somewhere in there, I think was the roots of, like this is this formal music of like rich folks. Somewhere in there was the start. Now, I'm not saying that it necessarily stands there, but somewhere in there was the start of that. Now, I think that, in today's scene, I think that, yeah, I think it was one of these pendulum things, and where, sort of like my father even once said that a lot of people see things, I think, what did he say? Like they see things going straight instead of from left to right. And he just says he viewed it as a pendulum.
It is a pendulum, yeah. And I'm trying to push it back. I think.
Yeah, and so I think that one of the things that happened, and then it was funny because he said that, and then I thought about the fusion thing. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because like you had jazz, with Armstrong, and then the swing era, and then and then you could say that the swing era like is here, and then bebop was like, okay, no, we got to bring this back over here, and then so anyway. You get to, let's say, like avant-garde is here, 60s, avant-garde. This is where fusion starts.
Yeah, totally.
Very early fusion's real out, but then, it starts to swing back this way, and then it ends up way over here, and I think that Wynton's thing was about, I think a lot of his stances was about respecting the music, in terms of, this music, shouldn't have to be just limited to just, some like club where there's 12. And there's not even, he wasn't against the club, but it should be in concert halls to be respected. Now the problem is eventually it swings to this other extreme where it leads to like, these what I think is the one term I've heard used is trustafarians, where you do get these like rich kid dead. That's which is why that's one of the things that yeah, that is something that did happen. It goes like that other extreme. And so that's why I even wanted to mention, the comment about my father and like the vision he had, because I don't think he anticipated what would end up happening with these colleges. Because see, he had like a real educational vision. I mean, I think, he wanted the music in colleges, but to be thoroughly taught, like in terms of what the whole history was. And not only that, the kind of gigs that were out there. Because I remember him telling me one time he had an idea for a class, and the idea was to have a guy that had a job. I don't know if it was an engineer or just something. He had a job, but then this band walked in the middle of the class playing. But the idea was to say, well, the guy who's the engineer, whatever his job was, says, okay, now we booked this band for a convention. And here was the rate that we had to book this band to play, and that's the thing, that those are gigs that are out there, you have people. But anyway, point being, he had a vision of like teaching, but the whole of the music, not only the history of it, but gigs that you play, different type of gig, really holistically.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's not quite what happened.
That's not what happened. And I'm a music teacher myself, not just a drum teacher. I've run music colleges, have run music courses. I've dealt with kids all the time. I ram jazz down their throat. They have to this, and I tell you, it's incredible. You can play in Fusion, Coltrane. I tell you what always opens the door for virtually every person in that class. Louis Armstrong. Every single time. That guy was the best. He was the best because he did it all. Sophisticated virtuosity, but also pop music, comedy, jokes, everything. And it's like, it's old music, so it's scratchy. But when I sit and explain what Louis is doing on it,
yes,
and in the whole class, kids, little, 16-year-old kids, they're like, "Whoa!" I go, listen to how uncool this band is that he's playing with. They're uncool, And then he starts playing. He's always the coolest guy there is, and that's the power of jazz. And the thing is that it's almost like jazz doesn't want to open its doors to everything that's done, because Elvis, he wasn't totally jazz, but there's a lot of jazz in Elvis, rock and roll. Ray Charles is jazz, James Brown is jazz.
It comes out of blues at the end of the day.
Yes, and jazz and blues are holding hands together. And Louis played on as many blues sessions as he did. Bessie Smith, all that. And I think that is the real history. And it's like, for me, when they get to jazz education, they focus on the European elements too much. And I bet your dad didn't want that. Did he? He wanted to focus on what jazz is. You and me play the drums, right?
Yes.
And at some point, what we play is a collection of instruments that some guy over 100 years ago decided, I'm going to play all these at once.
Yes.
Right. And it'll be a black guy. Ingenuity. It will be a black guy. When I tell you what, I'm going to do that gig. Kick drum, snare drum. I'll put the and so you get this technique on our percussion instrument, which is based upon coordination, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In the end, you end up with Jim Chapin, four-way coordination, all that stuff. That's a gift of jazz. That's a technique thing. It doesn't exist in classical percussion. Everything's different. Everything's different. And jazz is about the slurs and the notes and the swing and the groove and pushing the envelope and questioning what is going on around you, but also working with somebody else. And what I would love, and I'm only trying to play my little part on my channel, if the education establishments would go, right, what we got to do is open ourselves up to musicians. Let's open ourselves up, not shut the doors up and go, you can't come in, unless you play Stella by Starlight and get it double, that we got to move on. We've got to move on from that.
Oh yeah. Well, and not only that, one of the other problems too, and I'm not sure how, it's definitely in the States, maybe over there too, is that you had this whole system where in order to get like a good teaching, you had to have a degree. And so then you get folks that honestly don't have gig experience. They just did the college thing, and then they get a degree, and then they're able to teach because they did the college thing, but they weren't, excuse me, they weren't like working around town or with musicians. Because, going to college is fine. The problem is if you're only doing that, and then and then you create this bubble. And so I think that's a lot. That is something that happens. You get these guys that I think where my father was a little different. Of course, it was years earlier, but I mean, he did get his degree from college, but he had all these experiences playing these different gigs, doing that. So then when he did start teaching, it was in the 70s. He's still working around town. So it's almost like you have these classes, but it's important to learn in the classroom, but then there's learning outside of the classroom. In fact, and that reminds me, and this is funny because there's a recording of this. Dad took his the 1 year the Noka Jazz Ensemble had Wynton and Brantford and Donald Harrison saxophone. He was at Noka, and I forget. Anyway, he took the whole band to the studio, Ultrasonic Studios, this recording studio, and it was a field trip to say, all right, this is a recording studio. Here's how it's done. Just to think this is part of the reality of playing. And then there's this guy. His name is AJ Laurie, and he says, "Man, I really like your bands. Can I use them? Great. Okay, find out how much it pays. Find out what the tunes are." And they're actually on a record. The guy's name is AJ Laurie. I forget the name of it, but you can look it up. Like, there is a recording of them in high school on this record, and it was out of a field trip. But the point is, it was about how music, how it relates to life experiences, and not something you just learned in the classroom. Yeah,
I'm friends with a guy called Ben McLaughlin, and I'll send you a link to his film. He made a jazz documentary. It's called Jazztown, I think, and he's basically, that documentary. And I'll have to hook you up. You should have a chat with him as well. He's really knowledgeable on jazz history, and this film, because I'm British, right? So I can talk about the British jazz experience. Right. He basically interviews American jazz musicians in this town. Some of them are like nearly 100 years old. They go right back to the beginning, new guys. And you realize that what jazz really is about is get out there playing and working. And I got a friend called Tom Hill, and he's old school jazz bass player. He trained at Berkeley. And I remember asking him a question. I said, "How do you do this?" And he said to me, "What you do is you have to do what the guys used to do in the old days. That is, you have an idea, you learn a scale, say, or a pattern." And he said, "You go in the club and you play all night for 6 hours."
Yeah.
He says, that's what those guys were doing. He says that, the Monk, Coltrane, it wasn't college. They were doing that on the bandstand, weren't they? That they were doing it in front of audiences.
There were gigs. And not only that, and this is a context that often gets lost in various conversations. I remember telling a friend of mine about how it's unfortunate that we don't get a chance to play for dancers or for dancing. Man, I don't care.
Right. That's what jazz is. Not totally, but it's a big part.
But
that's why we drummers. That's what we love it for, don't we? That's why we love it.
Yeah, and so then they kept trying to tell me, "Oh man, wasn't that one gig you had? Wasn't that for dancing? I'm like, look, you don't understand. That's just one gig. Man, in the 30s, dudes was doing that every night. Every night. You keep trying to bring up one show where it just happened. Yeah. I mean, it's all right. But no, dudes every night was doing that. Man,
and soloing heavy. Those big bands, Lester Youngin, Ben Webster,
Oh, yeah.
Playing. They'd invented a form that people danced to, but also the improvisation was integral to building up that dance experience. So it's high art at the same time. And then the beboppers come in, and I can't tell you how much I grew up with this respect for beboppers. Then doing the channel and really starting to look at it, this really goes back to the beboppers. And then afterwards, the real creative musicians like Miles and Monk and Ornette Coleman, they're trying to break what bebop did, and they break it. And so when the fusion guys, the reason fusion could happen is because these guys is creating another way of playing. You can play with a rock band because you're not playing changes or 2-5-1s. This is what I felt when in the 80s, when that conservatism came back in. It was like they're denying that way of soloing, which I thought was an advance on what the beboppers were doing. And so when you said your dad was like, because it's Ornette Coleman and Coltrane, but especially Ornette, because I play guitar as well, and I'm not brilliant, but I try and solo and I play jazz standards. And when I started to study Ornette, and it was like, let your solo go where you want it to go.
Yes.
Don't worry about that so much. That was a breakthrough for me. That was a massive breakthrough.
My father had one great story of when he heard Ornette and Ed Blackwell practicing. And he said that Ed Blackwell was a Max Roach drummer, and so Max's thing was about outlining the form. you know, that was sort of to let him know, like, look, I might play drums, but I understand how form works. So it was outlining the form and really being clear on it. So Arnett and Blackwell are playing, man, and so they're playing out rhythm changes or something, and they get to the top, and Blackwell press on 1, and so then Arnett stops him and says, "Hey, man, who told you to end my phrase?" And when I heard that, I said, "Oh, that's what started like the playing across the bar, if you will, like the." You know, we're not going to just box the AAB, the 4-bar phrases. We're going to play across the bar. We might even hide the form. You know, might play blues, but you may not know it. Or, well, you know what? We're not going to really worry about where 1, 4, and 1 land. Wherever it is, okay, it's fine. So, well, yeah, we're opening things up.
When I was growing up, my big drum was Elvin Jones. And the reason I liked Elvin Jones was because the polyrhythms. Tony Williams was doing it. I didn't quite get that. It was Elvin for me. And then later on, I got Shut Up and Play Your Guitar by Frank Zappa with Vinnie Colaiuta on drums.
Oh, yeah.
And Vinny, I felt that rhythm section had created another way of playing jazz where the cadences weren't necessarily harmonic. They were rhythmic, you know, that there was a stress against it. And I can, you know, and the thing is, in the 80s, Brantford and Wynton were doing it as well. Jeff Tain was doing that. You know, I can remember seeing them live and saw Brantford live. And I thought, God, they are leaving this form behind. And they're so, and then they've come back. They know where they are, but they were leaving it behind, so far behind to come in.
Oh yeah,
and all that's a fusion thing. They're the fusion guys that really did that. But I know based upon Elvin and based upon Tony Williams, and Tony Williams was a fusion guy.
Oh yeah.
So even in that respect, you know, that way of soloing that comes out of fusion. And I'm not just talking about modal soloing, but I'm talking about the time and the form, you know. And, and then you get Schofield and Metheny, entirely Ornette Coleman style players, absolutely entirely. And I was chatting to this guy that went to jazz school, and when Pat Metheny did the trio album, this guy was criticizing him for not playing the changes. Pat Metheny.
Wow.
And that you know.
Wait a minute. Wait. Hold on. Is he talking about?
He was going. They were saying.
Is he talking about Rejoicing?
No, it's the trio album where he does Giant Steps with Bill Stewart on drums.
Oh, that's a different record. Okay.
Yeah, Rejoicing. That's an incredible album.
Yeah, it is.
Metheny doesn't like that album, does he? But that version of Lonely Woman.
Yes, exactly.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I'm gonna have to disagree with him on that, because here's the thing, and this is when I knew that was going to be happening. In one of those conversations, I happened to ask Brantford, like, "Hey, man," because I think I had heard one of Metheny's albums. I was like, "Yeah, but what's some Metheny that you would like? I would recommend." And then he's telling me some albums, and somewhere he says, "Oh yeah, is that the album Lonely Woman is on?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh wait, hold on." I mean, he just said it casually. Oh yeah, Lonely Woman's on that. Yeah, like he just casually said it, so I knew, okay, this must be ridiculous. And it is. Yeah, that's a great example of a ballad. Good God.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, but this one I don't know this one with Bill Stewart though.
Oh, there's a live trio and a studio trio. And
wait, 9900.
It's 00. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I got it.
Straight trio album, all jazz standards, few of Metheny's tunes. You know.
Yeah. I got to dig more into that one. Actually, I've heard it. It's really good, but it's been a while. I got to get back to it. I could detect it when I talk to jazz guys. I do jazz gigs, right? And I'll get on stage, and I came up with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I can keep up playing the jazz standards. I know that stuff. But as soon as you go towards, say, odd time signatures, and I've been on jazz gigs where I'm bending the time and I'm doing all that, and I'm going, well, this is jazz, and they're like, oh, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's like, and I go, well, there's, do you know what I'm saying? And it's not because I'm doing something popularistic or simple. This is difficult stuff. The fusion guys did some incredible stuff. What does Branton and Wynton think of someone like Michael Brecker? Oh, Brecker, yeah,
Brecker's full on fusion, pop sessions, but in terms of jazz
I
saxophone.
think
That's
that.
like an iconic.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's a lot of different things. I mean, Brecker and Brantford were like, there was a time they were like super cool with each other. Like they were kind of close for
Really?
yeah. I don't think it was well known, but because on Jeff Tain Watts did a record, Bar Talk, and he's got a tune on there, Mr. JJ, and it's Brantford and Brecker.
Oh, well, I'm
And
gonna
it's
check that out. I will check that out.
yeah, it's the two of them, and it was set up basically for the two of them to just play together and trade, just But I think the thoughts on Brecker was that I think that they saw it as well. Brantford, I'd really asked Wynton actually, but I think with Brantford it was more that I think that he wasn't as into Brecker, maybe from a swing standpoint, but technically it was just unbelievable and ridiculous. And there was obviously a language of the lesson, the language of the music that he definitely had. I think some of that though comes out of when you hear like all these students coming out of Michael Brecker.
Oh God, yeah, yeah.
I think it's more that.
Have you seen that video? Michael Brecker goes to this jazz college, and they get the best student up, and he plays this solo note for note. It's got to be about 8 minutes long, and Brecker's watching it, and at the end, Brecker goes, "Yeah, I'd like to hear what you do."
Right.
This kid must have worked on it for 6 months. Oh, I want to hear. And when I was watching it, it was the same thing. It's really great, but I want to hear what this guy, if he can play this, what's he going to sound like if he plays? Can you tell me a little bit, because you're from New Orleans and you're a drummer.
Yes.
Tell me about this swing thing, because when I was coming, I was a big John McLaughlin fan. Yeah. I was with a bunch of jazz guys, and they were proper jazz guys in the 80s when I first started playing jazz. And they said to me, they went, "Oh, he's got a lot of technique, but he can't swing." And I found that confusing,
Oh, McLaughlin?
Yeah, can't swing.
You know who else said that about John McLaughlin, believe it or not? Jaco Pastorius.
Yeah.
He said, and you know what? I think they said, first of all, yeah, John, there's like so many stories about John that are like dark. Like, and it's not even coming from me. It's just I've heard so many different stories, and none of them they're all dark. Which is
tell me some of these stories.
The first stories I heard was from like people who were just fans, and one guy was like, "Man, I just couldn't get." And these are guys who knew 70s fusion stuff. Just a fan. I mean, he played music too. But the first thing I hear is, and I'm just getting into Mahavishnu, so I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, tells me, "Man, I wasn't really into McLaughlin, man. He's on in a silent way and plays sharp the whole time, man. And I just, I'd rather somebody like a Tommy Bolin, man. I love Bolin, but McLaughlin, no." And then I talked to somebody else, and if I remember right, I think they were at the cellar door when Miles did the live stuff for Live Evil, and they were like, "Man, when it was Jarrett and these, it was great. Then McLaughlin came and ruined it." Like, what? Okay.
Keith Jarrett said something similar. He said, "We'd got this dynamic and we were doing this thing, and then Miles brings John McLaughlin in, and there he is just ruining it." And then I put that album on Live Evil. My God, it's like he was ahead. He was ahead to me.
But I think that, and then it's like, as it keeps going, I keep finding like darker, like they don't end.
Yeah.
Like another one, and this is one of those, like, this is the story I've heard. I don't know how accurate it is, but I was doing a project in New Orleans, actually. This is an interesting project, and where I was at, because I play vibes too.
Yeah, I've seen, yeah.
And it was interesting. It was like it was a group that a percussionist had that was dealing with Middle Eastern Indian music, and so it was like vibes and saxophone and like the tablas and the charode. And so then the guy who was tablas, he kind of put the thing together. The guy who played charode, he's like an older gentleman. He's like one of those guys that's been doing that 30 years. So I bring that up because at some point in the conversation, McLaughlin comes up, and like the stuff that McLaughlin did with Shakti. And so then the percussionist says, "Yeah, man, be careful mentioning McLaughlin, be careful mentioning, that band around this guy. He's kind of jealous because his story was that," this is the hearsay part, that I can't. His story was that he had a band like that, you know, with like, you know, Strode and the electric guitar, and you know, he had a band like that. And he said, claimed that McLaughlin saw the band and said, "Oh," and then next thing you know, Shakti happens. Now, you know, I don't know how, if that's what happened, but I'm like, damn, another dark story. Great. Then when I had met one of the guys who played with McLaughlin, so I'm like, let me try something. Yeah, man, love what you did with Mahavishnu Orchard. And then he didn't want to talk about it. It's like, okay. it's weird, man, with that. But I think that what it is with McLaughlin is that okay, I think it's this, especially earlier. There's a shuffle that you're not gonna hear. You know, it's like very, very straight. Now he can play chord changes, you know, and he can play on top of some, but I think what they're talking about is it was very like really, really straight. Yeah. Now later on, though, I think it was a little different. You know, I'm thinking of this record with Joey DiFrancesco and Elvin Jones.
Yeah,
that was a little more like okay, but I think that's what they meant earlier. It was like really, really straight.
If you go back to if you go back to 64, 65, listen to the Graham Bond stuff, listen to the stuff he's done with Danny Thompson where he's playing jazz standards, he has got that down. And they're playing rhythm and blues shuffles, and he's
right.
It's avant-garde in some places, but I think he was making a stance with when he hit that thing with, and I think Miles was going, "That's what I want from you."
Yeah,
because Scott Henderson said a similar thing to me when we sent a few messages. He said that Joe Zawinul said the same thing to him. I don't want those. He said, "I don't want that bebop stuff." I didn't say it like that.
Yeah.
You know, he says, "I want you to play the guitar."
Yeah. It's so funny, man. It's ironic. That's something also that the pianist I work with, Marcus Roberts, whenever he has horn players, he'll tell them, "Man, don't play bebop over this." You know, it's funny. But oh, did you ever hear and I remember hearing this record and I liked it, and it was interesting because it was it was definitely UK. John McLaughlin, like his first record, I think it was
Extrapolation, yeah.
Extrapolation, yes. Yeah. And it was interesting hearing that record because it was definitely because I've heard something, you know, because I've heard music out of the UK, and it's interesting to hear it. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, it sounds like it's from that area. It's like, you know, it's got kind of a difference because it's UK, it's different.
Yeah.
Which is what I like about it.
The thing is, here in the UK, when your brother emerged, we had the same thing here in the UK. Exactly the same thing happened. And the guy that was the main guy was Courtney Pine.
Yes, I remember Courtney. Yes.
I've chatted with Mark Mondesir, who was Courtney's drummer.
The drummer, yeah,
one of the greatest drummers ever lived. This is have you seen Mark? Mark should gone down in history. He's an incredible drummer. And there was like Julian Jones, Steve, and he said that it was really Julian Jones was the sort of anchor behind it. But Courtney again somehow grabbed that thing. But I always felt with Courtney Pine, because he'd come up through those reggae bands, which is a very UK British thing as well as being a West Indian reggae. But that you know that was in his music, and Courtney explored these areas. Very similar to Brantford. I mean, that Buckshot La Funk stuff. Yeah. That's some of the best fusion 1980s, 1990s, which I'm not too sure when I love that album.
Yeah, it was 94. Yeah.
94. I love that album.
Yeah. That was something that was one of the things that I love to remind folks about. You know, especially now, you know, they talk about the hip hop jazz thing, and you know, the new thing of this, and you know, and one of the things that I love saying, well, you know, the first person to really pour into that was Brantford, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm talking like, okay, here's the thing, and I don't know, this is one of those facts that some people know it and some people don't. But when the director Spike Lee, who Brantford was friends with, you know, he did the rap group Public Enemy did the song "Fight the Power," you know, which was definitely a big hit. But at the end of the song, especially if you're watching the movie, there's this alto saxophone. That's Brantford.
Really?
Yeah, that's Brantford. So, that was like the first time that he had done something like that. And then, for the Mo Better Blues soundtrack, the Mo Better Blues film for the soundtrack,
Yeah.
there was a song called Jazz Thing, and I think Spike wrote the words and the rapper Guru kind of like styled it up, like this history of jazz thing. And Brantford was responsible for the samples because it was a billion damn samples. Good God. Yeah. But also there was an instrumental track. This was a little more rare. You can find it on YouTube now. But there was a Jazz Thing instrumental, and it's killing. It's like 5 minutes of like Brantford and Kenny Kirkland just soloing over hip hop with like these different things. And so, yeah, Brantford was into that early on. And so, I was seeing that and I knew, okay, at some point he's going to make a record like this. So that's what Buckshot was. I think the second one, I prefer the second one over the first only because I think that the first one, I think it started off as hip hop jazz, but then it started to venture into his view of pop music. And I think some of the stuff is better than others. I think the second one was more, okay, let's get a band, and all right, now I've got a concept of how I want to do all of this.
Because that for me, that lays the groundworks for M-Bass, Steve Coleman. Because I think that stuff was, Steve Coleman's that M-Bass thing was one of the great movements in jazz in the last sort of 30 years, which now I'm talking to jazz guys and they don't know about it.
Yeah, there was a lot that happened. In fact, I remember Brantford, if I remember this right, he was really into the first Steve Coleman 5 Elements album.
Yeah.
The very first one. I remember him telling me, man, first album's killer. And he was really into that one. But I think that what happened was, I think from an audience standpoint, I think the audience became really splintered. So that's how, that's why you have some folks don't even know that Wynton's music even happened. I mean, you have some folks like that. They don't even know any of that even went down. So, because I think it just became very splintered. And so I can see what you're saying. You mentioned music, you're like, wait, who? What?
Yeah.
So,
I was buying Wynton's albums, and then I bought Royal Garden Blues.
Right.
And that was more interesting to me. It seemed to be opening. Al Foster on drums. It was like a different.
Yeah.
And so I then started to follow Brantford down, and he did an album. I think, is it called The Black Keys, sax, drums, bass?
Oh, The Dark Keys. Yeah.
The Dark Keys. That is one of the great jazz albums of the last 40 years. And he's playing in the tradition, but he's also pushing the tradition, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah. The thing about both Wynton and Brantford, and this is really interesting, and this is kind of like, I like my music to kind of be a combination of those two, is that that I think that Wynton is the type that's more into how the music is structured, and how what the forms are, and how the music is organized, and how the music is presented, But Brantford, on the other hand, there's a certain freedom that, and almost and this goes back to Marcus Roberts. He said, man, Brantford's music demands freedom. He said, it demands that. So, there is a certain kind of thing with these open structures, and open forms and things. One of the things that, that really amazed me actually was there was a time, I think it was in the year 1991, where both Wynton and Brantford did music that was almost like these polar opposites to the point where they're parallel. One was an album Wynton did called City Movements, which was shocking to me because all of a sudden everything is composed. And I'm like, what the hell? What do you? Yeah, I wrote this. You what? What in the what? So it's that's shocking. And at the same time, there was a live concert that was for a video called "The Music Tells You." It was a video that came out. It was like a kind of a casual documentary. They're just following Brantford on the road. That's pretty much what it is. So I had gotten this tape from my older brother Delphio because he recorded the show, and and so the tape was them playing music from this album, Beautiful Ones and Not Yet Born, but it's live. And so then they do this tune, Xavier's Lair, which doesn't have any set changes at all, but they get into all these things and all these sections and all this stuff going on. And I'm like, what the hell? It's almost like this weird opposite of City Movement, but almost parallel, because there's all this improvisation, all this stuff that you swear is written, but it's not. And I'm like, I don't believe this is happening. So, well, the concert ended up being released under the name Bloomington.
That was a door that was opened up in the 60s by the free jazz guys, but they were trying to I think a lot of the free jazz guys didn't want to reference anything. And then when a lot of the 80s guys played free, and Brantford's one of those, because I've heard the stuff. It's free jazz, but if you want to groove or you want to start playing some changes, you can do whatever you want. And Chick Corea did an album called Trio Music as well, and that's the same thing. That it's like you feel it's free, but they can go wherever they want, which is an incredible thing. The other thing I want to ask you is,
yes,
what do you think about the Ken Burns jazz documentary?
Because, I'm glad you asked.
Brother, because I think that's where, for me personally, I used to watch that. I got to say this because it sounds like I'm being negative. I used to watch that every year religiously. I mean, a lot of the stuff on my channel where I know about jazz history has come from those Ken Burns documentaries, and Wynton plays such a big part in it. But so many people I know in the fusion end of the or free end of jazz are like, well, you get to the 1970s, suddenly, well, where's Keith Jarrett? Where's Joe Zawinul?
And here's the thing about that. This is not the first time that's happened. Okay, now, and here's my story on that. And I mean, the thoughts were, I think that the documentary overall was enjoyable. There were a lot of things that were left out, but there's a story that I have about when the documentary gets to 1970. Okay, so I'm going to give some context on this. PBS, in the early 1990s, they did a series called American Masters. And what I found was the ones on the people were great. Like there was an episode on Louis Armstrong.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Which was incredible. And the one thing that was funny was, Wynton was on it, but the cat who was really breaking it down was Lester Bowie. Lester Bowie was breaking it down to where Wynton was like, damn, man, Lester was saying some things about Pop, like he was breaking it down. But the thing on Pops was great. The one on Billie Holiday was great. And I got to look them up, but American Masters. So anyway, there's this American Masters called The Story of Jazz. And it's 2 hours. Well, okay, all right, let's see what you do. And that one, the beginning kind of, I wasn't really sure how accurate. I don't know if this is really accurate in terms of the beginning of the music, and another thing I noticed, the narrator sounds like a guy that was a fan of the music in the 1950s. And so, they're going on. And I mean, it's okay. But there's an agenda. I can't pinpoint what it is, but it felt like there was one, or at least in the narrator's voice. So anyway, it's going along and it's okay. So then they get to the 69, 1970, and they mention the fusion thing. And they said, yes, then in the 70s, you had Miles Davis, and you did Bishop's Brew, and fusion happened, and these musicians had very interesting album covers. And then, I swear to you, the segment lasted 30 seconds. I was like, what just happened? Wait, what? Like, damn. And then a new generation appears. Then it gets worse. So they're showing footage of Marcus Roberts, and it's funny because I still work with Marcus. There was a video Marcus did called Deep in the Shed. All right. They're showing footage of this. And then there's guys are saying things like, there's been no new innovation since John Coltrane, which there's some truth to that. But the problem I'm having is that they're doing it to dismiss music after that.
Yeah, and there has been innovation. There has been innovation. And it's like, when I did that video, I kept saying to everybody, that was, I don't think that all modern jazz musicians sound the same. It was something that somebody put on my channel, and I thought I'll discuss it. And I said, I think this, I'm not agreeing with it, but this attitude is down to three things. It's one is the move to conservatism in the 1980s, you know, which happened not just with your brother, like in the UK, you had it with a whole bunch of the jazz.
I think it was across the board.
That there was a definite thing. The academization of jazz in the colleges, and now we have the internet. And so musicians, you are not going to get traction if you sound different.
Yeah, the internet has a bunch of that's a whole bunch of problems there.
And those
you know what? Yeah, can I pause 1 minute? I am so sorry about this. Yeah. I've got to answer this message real quick.
Okay, you do that.
Yeah, let me just pause. Just give me 1 second. I'm so sorry, but I got to finish that story. But hold on, I'm so sorry. Wait a minute.
I think I might have to pause it. Actually, I'll pause it.
I mean, and I'll get to. Oh, cool. You back on?
Yeah.
All right. I'll get to the modern players in a second. But so anyway, and I mean, you know, there has been some innovation, and you know, there's some that are agree and disagree. But the point is, this guy is saying there's been no major innovation since John Coltrane, and something I forget what else was said, but you don't know who's in the video. So basically, they're saying there's these young dudes. We don't know who they are. We don't care. This ain't. You don't need to know this. Who cares? So I'm like, damn. So the point is, when the Ken Burns documentary gets to 70, I'm thinking of that clip, and I'm like, oh God, this is going to end in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, well, there's credits. So I think what it represented was, I think, the casual fans' view. And I think that this is what I'm thinking is that I think that you have, because I think that in the 40s and 50s and 30s, there was a community of folks that were really into the music. And I think that's why a lot of folks revere like the classic albums. But I think that you get to 70, I think fusion I think you had another kind of community, and then you had folks that just weren't into it. But I think you get to 80 and then it's just really splintered. I mean, you have like folks that know about Wynton, some don't. Yes, I mean, I remember talking to a woman who was telling me they were a cabaret singer in New York in the 80s. And I think they found out about Wynton later, like in the late 90s. And they said that they bought a copy of Black Coats from the Underground and listened and said, man, I didn't know guys were even playing like that in New York. And they were in New York.
That's an incredible.
So I think it was just splintered. And so that's when I was like, oh boy, this is going to be over soon. And so it's like what happened with Burns, it was like an expanded version of the same thing. They mentioned Miles and, you know, how there were bands doing it, but they didn't go further into it, which I think they could have, but they didn't do that. And then you get to the 80s and they mentioned Wynton. Fun fact, a lot of folks talk about, oh, you know, Wynton spoke a lot about, did you know that not one Wynton album was mentioned throughout the entire thing? Not one album. And that's what I mean about the mainstream fans' perspective. I mean, you have folks who know Wynton's name, but they don't know his music or albums or what's significant, good or bad. They just know his name, but yet not one album of his or any albums, even what was going on after that. And I think to me, that was the biggest flaw, but at the same time, I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I was like,
I've learned a lot talking to you. I really have, because I've opened up this thing and I've had so many conversations with different people, and I don't really know. And I think I'm slowly getting to it. And I think you are right in what you're saying, is that there's so much there. I'd love to get you on with Ben McLaughlin as well for another chat at some point. Would you be up to that?
Yes.
Because, you know, he's making this documentary, and I think he would be a great contact for him as well, because he's making at the moment he's making a documentary on women in jazz, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll have to get together, because I'm getting a group of people that are discussing this, because it could be that jazz it's dead and done. It's like you know
what let me see how to put this. I think that the concept isn't but maybe the era is like the one thing, like there's an interesting story that my father tells, and this is about Miles, and he talked about when '85, when Miles played at the New Orleans Jazz Heritage Festival, and went and opened up for him. And everybody's backstage. In fact, I remember I was 8 years old, so I knew who Miles was, but part of me didn't really care. So Miles autographed the photo, and I'm taking it, running around, dropping it on the floor. But I still have the photo, by the way.
Yeah.
I still have it. It didn't get lost. But no, the story that my father always tells, and I think this is one of these big, dividing lines when it comes to music, was he to the point I even have audio of him telling this story in an interview where Wynton's back there and Wynton starts talking to Miles about the early records, probably 50s, 60s, or whatever it was. And then Miles turned to one of his band members and said, "Hey, man, any of y'all heard those records?" And they said, "No." And Miles said, "Man, that's messed up." Well, he didn't say that, but that's a story that he would tell a lot. And I really think Miles's point of view was they remembered when the music was popular. It's like 30s, 40s, and they remembered that, but they also remembered when rock and roll was taking over, and all of a sudden, swing isn't the fashionable thing. And I think that Miles just saw it as, well, that's done. Now, my father, on the other hand, being from New Orleans, even though the music he's playing is very modern, very modern. In fact, I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a CD called Classic Elvis Marsalis.
No, I haven't taken that.
Yeah, I recommend checking that one out. It was his very first album, and it's actually a shocking record because people to this day think of New Orleans as like trad jazz. You're like, oh yeah, when I think of New Orleans music, this is very progressive modern music. Very, like, it's coming out of like Coltrane's quartet, and the drummer James Black was super creative, was writing these tunes with these odd bars, and it was very, to the point where you're thinking of New Orleans and hear this record, it's like shocking, like, that's New Orleans? No, it isn't. They're playing modern. What do you mean? No, but anyway, but I think that in New Orleans is a place that is about passing the music down. You've had these traditional families, and oh, by the way, like even us, when folks talk about the Marsalis family, first family in jazz, we're like, what the hell ever? You come to New Orleans, they got all kind of families, miles of them, So ours is just a blip on the radar. So, but they believe in passing the music on. And I think that was my father's belief. And I don't know if Miles really believed in that. I think that he was just looking at where trends were and where things were going. And I think that's one of those like ultimate arguments, if you will. And I think some folks, they don't believe in that. They're looking at things that are fashionable, or they look at, I think for me, I just believe in whatever's great. And, passing on whatever's great, I believe in that. Now, I'll tell a quick story about the young folks now and why it is that I'm their biggest critic, and will be forever. And I'll make this brief because I do have to get going. But we'll definitely continue this at some point. I think this has been great, so, and I had a feeling this was going to be fun. So, but here's what happened with me in a lot of those people. It was in the 2000s when I started to play the vibes, and I wasn't really that good at it. Like, honestly, I really wasn't. I just said to myself, there's some things I can do in this instrument, but I just got to share and get things together. And I started doing gigs. But I noticed that, some guys I would work with, I was having a hard time with telling them, well, look, this is what we need to do. I was saying that there's some basic things that we need to address, with just playing. But they were wanting to jump on complex things. I mean, and that's not a new thing, but there was this different kind of resistance. They're wanting to jump on these complex things and so forth. And then I remember one of the younger musicians was telling me about some new music that was out. Oh, this is great. And I was like, all right. And then I put the music on and I fell asleep. I was bored. I'm like, something's not right here. I got to figure this out. And what I realized was you started to have guys coming out of the school and then cheering each other on. And you'd have guys cheering on guys they went to school with. And I'm thinking, oh, great. The 1980 U.S. Hockey Olympic team mentality is in music. Yay. I'll explain what that means. Because I'm sure folks are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Whiplash.
There's a story.
Whiplash.
Oh yeah. Well, that's another thing there.
Yeah.
But that's
If that had been a sports movie, it'd been a good movie.
Yeah, but I think that I think that there were stories about the U.S. hockey team, how guys at first didn't like each other because of the schools. Oh yeah, well they're from the University of Minnesota. I don't like them. Oh, they're from the University, whatever. And I even heard the story again. I think with like even U.S. women's soccer team saying, "Oh, they're at this school. Oh man." So this is starting to happen. Dudes are cheering. And so what happens is, what was it? What happens is, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. No, I'll finish this up real quick.
Real
what
life.
happened? Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very. Yes. But what happens is, like, I remember talking to one of those guys, one of the younger guys, and I was, some album had come out and I was curious about it, but I told him, like, I gotta be honest, man, like a lot of the newer records, I haven't really been inspired by them. I just haven't. And then I could tell that upset him because I wasn't even being super dark. I was just saying it hasn't really inspired. And then he's telling me, well, man, see, here's what you need to do. I'm like, but, excuse me? Telling me what it is and how I need to listen to the music and the way I need to. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, you're telling me how, what? I'm like, damn. So I'm starting to get like, okay, I'm starting to get kind of disgruntled with these people. So the final straw came when my father went to see one of these bands. And I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of these young guys. And he told me, yeah, man, it was interesting. The saxophone player would play a solo, and then once he was finished, he'd stand in a corner and look at the ground. Pianist was doing his best Keith Jarrett impression. But then when I looked out at the audience, I noticed a room full of people working at trying to enjoy the show. He said, I'd never seen nothing like that. In the old days, people would at least boo or leave or something, but they were working at trying to enjoy the show. So at that moment, I said to myself, okay, so folks have now accepted the new music. They've accepted it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to call all of you out. I can't put up with this anymore. Because what had happened, and we'll go into depth about this next time, but one of the things that did happen, and this is what I mean by filling in the gaps, because I think that with Wynton and the influence, it's odd because some ways he's influential musically, but in some ways he's influential career-wise, and then you have folks that don't check out the music at all. And so what happened was, I think that the one band that became heavily exploited, and we have not had a conversation on yet, but I'm looking forward to it, was the Brian Blade Fellowship. Yeah, and see, I don't know how much you know about Brian Blade.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, Brian Blade is from Shreveport, Louisiana. And Brian lived in New Orleans for a time in the early 90s. So me and Blade actually go back quite a bit, And I mean, the stuff that he's done with Wayne Shorter is, of course, incredible. And when I heard the Brian Blade Fellowship, my first thought was there were things I liked. There were some things I wasn't as into, but I liked that he was going in this different direction. And I was like, yeah, let's see where this goes. It's a refreshing sound. But then all of a sudden, there were bands in New Orleans, like 3 of them, that were playing like the Fellowship. And I just said, this is not going to end well. Because not saying don't check them out or not be influenced, but it's like they just sort of went that pendulum going that other extreme, where all of a sudden the students only want to play straight eighth music. Like that's all they want to do, instead of like mixing things up and doing some things swing, some things funk. No, they just want to play straight eighth music. And so then a lot of the music, this goes to the point of things being the same. It ends up being it because, they're interested in a lot of the same things. And so that's starting to happen. And then some of the newer records start getting like more boring and more like, but then people started to accept it. Oh yeah, that's just what they do now. That's the new thing.
I started off my video like this. I get, check this guy out, and I put it on, and I'm like, yeah. Like it's what I expect to see is what I see.
Yeah. Oh, that's the new jazz, and oh, really? Like to the point where I even jokingly said, "Man, I remember when Wynton first got to New York, man, and people hated his playing. Where are they?" Where are you? We need you now.
Yeah.
Where are you? Oh God. Oh, good times. But anyway, so let me skip around a little bit. So it was around this time that I had another one of these conversations with Brantford, and he was telling me, "Yeah, man." He's like, "Yeah, I'm not." We were just saying this newer stuff, man. I just can't. Brantford's like, "Yeah, man." And he said something that really stood out. He said, "Yeah, man. Yeah, I can't get with this nerd music." And I was like, I said, "That's it. These guys, they're jazz nerds. That's it." So then, and I don't know if you know the story about this, but so then, and when I say that I'm like the young musician's biggest critic and nobody comes close, well, here's an example. So it was sometime 2000 something where there's a video of Brantford being interviewed that went viral because he was asked, "So what do you think of young musicians today?" And Brantford's like, "Yeah, I think they're full of shit." They want to be told how great. They want to be told how great they are. They want to be told and all that, of course, it was controversial and everything. But here's the thing. It was not long after that, and I don't know the timing, but it was definitely a few months that I started doing my own gigs. And I created my own spiel. And I wrote this tune that was called Blues Can Be Abstract Too, which is a play on Oliver Nelson, but it's a way of saying blues can be a lot of things. It doesn't have to be this one thing. It could be anything really. It could be super abstract. It could be non-swing based. It reminds me of that tune that I got to write where it combines the concepts of both Wynton and Keith Jarrett. But anyway, I'll tell you that story another day. But anyway, point being, that was the point. Blues could be, it could go anywhere. So, but anyway, what I did was, and I'm like talking to the audience, and I would tell them, "Hello, we're going to do a tune now, and I'd like to dedicate this to an organization that is playing in the music today. It's called JNI, Jazz Nerds International. Here's how it works. They're not interested in playing blues. They're not interested in playing any swing. They're not interested in playing any grooves. They don't want to play any standards. They're only interested in straight feel esoteric music and writing music with odd meters and odd bars. And it's very boring and uninteresting." The audience is like, "Is he okay? What's going on?" And so I did this gig in Toronto, and one of the guys there was, "Hey man, wow, can I make a video of this?" "Yeah." So he makes a video of it, and I'm going off and about this music being boring and guys just playing for themselves and this and that and everything. And the guy puts it up on YouTube. Like, "All right, yeah, sure, whatever." We get a phone call from Marcus Robertson. He was like, "Hey man, your talk of this jazz nerds thing is taking off. Like, what are you talking about? Man, like, man, it's big. Folks are talking about, like, what?" So I go, like, what? Okay. I go to Google and type in Jazz Nerds International, and all of a sudden, there's an article in the Los Angeles Times. And I'm like, "Oh boy, what the hell's going on?" And I open up and read the article. And it was interesting because the guy didn't fully understand what I was saying. Because I think that what he first thought was, "Oh, great, the Marsalises are back. But instead of Wynton, now we got to deal with Jason. Oh, great. he was thinking, oh, the Jazz Wars, you know, being against fusion, and it's like, no, that's not it. And he made one statement that was interesting, and but what he said was, well, you know, you have to understand, Jason comes from the tradition, but people like Robert Glasper, Kendrick, Christian Scott, and Esperanza Spalding, they're like the new guard. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I'm actually not that older than Robert Glasper. We're close to the same age. But wait, why are they the new guard? Wait, how? And then I thought about it. I'm like, oh, that's right. Yeah. And I'll delve into why at another time, actually. You know,
I'm getting a feel for it.
yeah.
I think
Anyway,
you on this. I can't wait to put this up on my channel, because I think you have eloquently critiqued your own brother in a very respectful and yet penetrating way. I really respect that. But I think overall, in terms of, you know, my idea of your brother in Brantford, I've got a completely different idea, you know. And the thing is, I think what it is that all these discussions are great, aren't they? In the end,
well, of course.
this is what, if you can't have a stance, you know, and now you're not allowed to do that, are you? You can't have a stance. You can't say, I don't like something. That's basically the problem, isn't it?
That is true. That is absolutely true.
You cannot say you don't like something.
That is true. And, you know, in fact, and I mean, and the thing is, you know, the thing is that there's things that I'm not going to agree with them, not in an argumentative way, but we didn't have the same experience. That's the thing. I mean, you know, like the pop music that was popular when Wynton and Brantford were coming up, it wasn't popular when I was coming up, so it's a different experience. But anyway, the point being though was, when I saw this article, I wrote the guy back and I had a whole response. And I'm like, here's what this is about. This isn't really any jazz words or anything, but what has happened is that you now have a generation that is not studying the music. Like, they're just not, you know, like, you know, and I talked about, you know, like, I can't remember all that was said, but I mentioned, you know, there's a lot of music that is out here. There's a lot to pull from, but they may listen to like Dave Holland's band, great band, but then ignore like stuff he's done previously, or they'll listen to Wayne Shorter Quartet, but then now you ready to discuss Wayne with Weather Report, or Wayne with Miles, or Wayne with Blakey. Okay, if you're not, don't come near me, because I'm ready to go with all of them. So, but that was the point. There's all this stuff that they're just not checking out. And I think that, to your point, the biggest thing, and I'll just conclude with this, and we'll continue this another time, but I think that we are at a point now where younger players listen to a lot of the same things. You know, they listen to a lot of the same things. And also, I think the biggest thing was, I think, and you're right about like taking a stance, which is why I'm just hard. Like, I'm going to be the hardest critic to these kids because they need it. But I think that, and I'll just conclude with this, they were listening to a lot of the same things. And so, I mean, I think that there's a lot of music that exists, and there's a lot of places that it can go. And once you realize that, the possibilities of where music can go are endless. And I'll leave you with one musical example. Okay. Like, you know, I asked myself, you know, when these guys weren't playing swing-based music, and I asked myself, well, is the reason I like it because they're not swinging? Is that what it was? And first I'm thinking, well, no, because in the 70s, the stuff was rock-based, they were killing. But then I heard music, and it's kind of a long story. It was a vibraphonist who came to New Orleans from France, and he had a gig with a band. I couldn't be there. I was out of town. I had to go out of town. But I come back to, he asked for my instrument. I loaned him the instrument. He played the gig. I come back to town, and they tell me, oh yeah, this guy, he left the CD. I was like, oh, okay. And I'm not thinking much of it, you know, because people leave CDs all the time. This is early 2000s. But I look at it and I was like, oh, this looks professionally done. And I hadn't heard him playing. Let me check it out. And I put the record on, and it blew my mind. The first tune was actually an odd meter tune, but not like straight eighth though. It was straight, but it was like a groove. And I'm like, damn, yeah, this, you know, it was almost like flamenco music influence in a way, where they're playing, and then the record goes on, and what I realized was, you know what? If somebody heard the importance of blues and swing and said, well, you know what? I don't want to do that. This is how you do it. This dude he uses blues. It's not blues based, but he uses it. It's not swing based, but sometimes they use it. But it was based in European folk music. I was like, yeah, this is it. This is how you do it.
Yeah, you're opening up a door now.
I'm like,
You are that. Yeah, it's.
And the guy,
if I start talking about, being here for another hour, so it's
yeah. And the guy's
it's going
name
really
was,
dark here. It's like
yes,
nearly midnight here. So
yep. The guy's name, the vibraphonist was named Nobel Le Caron. He's from France, and he made some amazing records. But that answered my question. Well, no, that's not the problem, because that's not a swing-based music, but it's inspiring and incredible. So, yeah, I think that the concept of it, I think the concept of the music is not dead. I think the whole thing of improvisation is not dead. I think that the way that it used to function in society, yeah, that part, yes, but I think it's time to find something else, and that's.
I think, and you have to have these conversations, don't you? You got to have these conversations, because it's like, I mean, I'm 55 years old, so I've had a music career. It's not been in jazz; it's been in somewhere else, you know. Every musician I know, regardless of the style of music, goes back to jazz. They all do. And
yeah, so it's the roots of all this stuff.
It's the roots of all this stuff. And it's like, if I'm working with a singer and she's into like Amy Winehouse or Mariah Carey or whatever, you can play them Billie Holiday or Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and they get it straight away. And they know. It's like my daughter sings, and I when she was little, I played Ella Fitzgerald, and she goes, "What's the point in this, Dad?" And I said, "Why?" She goes, "No one can be better than that."
Oh,
so that's always going to be there. The musicians will always find their way to the jazz.
Yep. Oh, they will.
They will. But they got to find their own way of doing it. Shall I hit stop record then?
Yes.
I'm going to stop record. That's been amazing, really inspiring. So I'm going to stop it there. Right.